In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple's sharp eyes spot trouble at Langley Manor. A young wife, Eleanor, and her sly brother Victor plot to poison Colonel Langley for his fortune, framing his son, Arthur. As family secrets unravel, and poison strikes at a village fete, Miss Marple sets a clever trap. With whispers, letters, and hidden clues, she exposes a deadly betrayal, saving the Colonel and his family. Will her wisdom stop the killers in time? The truth is closer than you think. Chapter 1. The Whisper of Suspicion. The morning sun spilled over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft gold. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking gently. Her cottage, neat as a pin, smelled of lavender and fresh tea. Outside, roses climbed the garden wall, and sparrows chirped in the hedges. But Miss Marple's sharp blue eyes weren't on the flowers or the birds. They were on the world beyond her gate, where secrets hid in plain sight. She loved St. Mary Mead. It was a small place, full of familiar faces, shopkeepers, vicars, and gossips who shared too much over tea. But small didn't mean simple. Villages, Miss Marple knew, were like her knitting. One loose thread could unravel everything. And today she felt a tug on that thread. It started at the village shop. Miss Marple had gone for yarn and a tin of biscuits. The shop was busy, with Mrs. Price behind the counter, her cheeks red from talking. A group of women huddled near the shelves, their voices low but sharp, like scissors snipping paper. Miss Marple, pretending to study a jar of jam, listened. "It's the Langleys, I tell you," said Mrs. Wicket, the baker's wife. "Colonel Langley's changed his will again. Cut his own children out, they say." "Arthur and Clara won't stand for it," whispered Mrs. Dane, the postmistress. "That new wife of his, Eleanor, she's got him wrapped around her finger." Miss Marple's needles paused in her bag. Colonel Langley was St. Mary Mead's richest man, a gruff old soldier who lived in the big manor on the hill. His first wife, Mary, had died years ago, leaving him with 2 grown children, Arthur and Clara. Then, last year, he'd married Eleanor, a young woman with bright smiles and city ways. The village hadn't stopped talking since. "Eleanor's too sweet, if you ask me," Mrs. Wicket went on, "always fussing over the Colonel. But I saw her at the chemist, buying pills, and him with that bad heart." "Shh!" Mrs. Dane glanced around, spotting Miss Marple. "Morning, Miss Marple. Fine day, isn't it?" Miss Marple smiled, her face soft, but her eyes sharp. "Very fine, Mrs. Dane, though I hear there's trouble brewing at Langley Manor." The women froze, then laughed nervously. "Oh, just talk," Mrs. Wicket said, waving a hand. "You know how folks gossip." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was already working. Gossip wasn't always wrong. She remembered old Mrs. Finch, years ago, who'd bragged about her new will before her nephew helped her down the stairs. No one had listened to the village chatter then, except Miss Marple. She'd seen the greed in the nephew's eyes, and the fear in Mrs. Finch's. That case had ended with a confession and a pair of handcuffs. Could the Langleys be hiding something similar? She paid for her yarn and biscuits, then stepped into the street. The village was alive with spring. Children laughed by the pond, and Mr. Tuttle swept his bakery steps. But Miss Marple's thoughts were on Langley Manor. A changed will, a young wife, a sick husband. It was a pattern she'd seen before, in books and in life. Betrayal, she thought, often started with love, or the pretense of it. Back home, she poured tea and settled into her armchair. Her mind sorted the gossip like puzzle pieces. Colonel Langley was old, maybe 70, with a weak heart. Arthur, his son, was a hothead who drank too much at the Red Lion pub. Clara, his daughter, was quieter, always reading or gardening, but her eyes held a shadow like someone carrying a secret. And Eleanor, well, Eleanor was the question mark. Beautiful, charming, and far too young for the Colonel. Why had she come to St. Mary Mead? Love or something colder? A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Rose, the Langleys' housemaid, a shy girl with freckles and nervous hands. "Miss Marple, ma'am," she said, twisting her apron. "Mrs. Langley, Eleanor, I mean, asked if you'd come to tea tomorrow. At the Manor. She says it's to thank you for the church flowers you sent." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. She'd sent those flowers weeks ago. Why the sudden invitation? "How kind of her," she said. "Is the Colonel well enough for guests?" Rose hesitated. "He's not himself, ma'am. Tired, mostly, and cross. He shouted at Arthur yesterday, right in the hall. I heard it from the kitchen." "Shouting?" Miss Marple kept her voice gentle, like she was asking about the weather. "What about?" Rose blushed. "I shouldn't say, but it was about money. Arthur wanted his share now, not later. Said he's tired of waiting. The Colonel told him to get out." Miss Marple nodded, her face calm, but her mind racing. An angry son, a changed will, a wife buying pills. The pieces were starting to fit, but the picture was still blurry. "Thank you, Rose. Tell Mrs. Langley I'll be there at 4. Rose bobbed a curtsy and left. Miss Marple sipped her tea, staring at the roses outside. She didn't trust sudden invitations. Eleanor was up to something, maybe showing off her perfect marriage to quiet the gossip. Or maybe she wanted Miss Marple to see something else. People, Miss Marple knew, often invited you to hide their secrets, not share them. The next day, she dressed in her best tweed skirt and hat, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. Langley Manor was a short walk, past the church and up the hill. The house loomed large, all stone and ivy, with tall windows that caught the sun. Miss Marple rang the bell, and Rose opened the door, her face pale. "They're in the drawing-room, ma'am," Rose whispered. "But be careful, it's tense today." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Don't worry, dear. I've seen tense before. The drawing-room was grand, with velvet curtains and a crackling fire." Colonel Langley sat in an armchair, his face grey and lined. Eleanor stood beside him, her blonde hair glowing, her smile bright as polished silver. Arthur slouched by the window, a glass of whisky in his hand. Clara sat on a sofa, a book in her lap, her eyes darting between her father and Eleanor. "Miss Marple, how lovely!" Eleanor's voice was warm, but her eyes were sharp, like she was measuring every move. "We're so grateful for your flowers, aren't we, darling?" Colonel Langley grunted, his hand shaking on his cane. "Yes, yes, good of you, Miss Marple. Sit, have some tea." Miss Marple sat, her knitting needles clicking softly. She watched Eleanor pour tea, her hands steady, but her smile too tight. Arthur muttered something under his breath, and Clara shot him a look. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. "Such a charming house," Miss Marple said, her voice light. "You must love it here, Mrs. Langley." "Oh, I do," Eleanor said, handing her a cup, "though it's a lot to manage. The Colonel's health keeps me busy, doesn't it, darling?" The Colonel coughed, his eyes dull. "Too much fussing," he muttered. "I'm fine." Arthur snorted, draining his glass. "Fine? You look half dead, father. Maybe it's all that medicine she's shoving down your throat." "Arthur!" Clara's voice was sharp. "Stop it!" Eleanor's smile didn't waver, but her fingers tightened on the teapot. "Arthur's just worried," she said. "We all are. The Colonel's heart isn't what it used to be." Miss Marple sipped her tea, watching. Eleanor's words were smooth, but her eyes flicked to Arthur, then to the Colonel, like she was waiting for something. Miss Marple noticed the medicine bottle on the sideboard, small, brown, with a handwritten label. She also saw Rose hovering in the doorway, her hands twisting again. "Dr. Hargrove's been wonderful," Eleanor went on. "He checks on the Colonel every week. Don't you, Dr. Hargrove?" Miss Marple hadn't noticed the doctor in the corner, a thin man with grey hair and tired eyes. He nodded. "Doing my best. The Colonel's a fighter." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, "though medicine can be tricky. I had a cousin once who mixed up her pills, nearly killed her." Eleanor laughed a little too loudly. "Oh, I'm very careful. I measure every dose myself." Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was on that bottle. Why did Eleanor insist on handling it? Most wives left such things to nurses or maids. And why was Rose so nervous? The girl was watching Eleanor like a mouse watches a cat. The conversation turned to village matters, the fete, the church roof, the new vicar. But Miss Marple kept her eyes on the family. Arthur's anger was loud, but Clara's silence was louder. She hadn't turned a page in her book, and Eleanor was playing a part, like an actress in a village play. Miss Marple had seen that act before, in a woman who'd poisoned her husband for his money. The memory made her fingers pause on her needles. As she left the manor, Rose followed her to the gate. "Miss Marple," she whispered, glancing back at the house, "I saw something odd. Mrs. Langley. She put a letter in Arthur's coat pocket yesterday. I don't know why, but it felt wrong." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Thank you, Rose. Keep your eyes open, dear, and don't worry." She walked home, the hill cool under the evening sky. The letter was a clue, small but sharp, like a dropped stitch. Eleanor was weaving something, maybe a trap for Arthur, maybe something worse. And the Colonel's tired face, that medicine bottle, the village gossip, it all pointed to betrayal. Miss Marple didn't know the whole pattern yet, but she felt it like a chill in the air. Someone in Langley Manor was lying, and lies, she knew, always unravelled in the end. Chapter 2. Tea at Langley Manor. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the cobblestone path to Langley Manor. Miss Jane Marple walked steadily, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, her sensible shoes tapping the ground. Her tweed hat sat neatly on her white hair, and her blue eyes sparkled with quiet purpose. The invitation to tea at the manor had been polite, but Miss Marple didn't trust politeness. In her experience, it often hid sharper things, like knives or secrets. The manor loomed ahead, its stone walls heavy with ivy, its windows glinting like watchful eyes. Miss Marple had been here before, years ago, when Colonel Langley's first wife, Mary, was alive. Back then, the house had been warm, full of laughter and children's voices. Now, the air felt different, tight, like a rope pulled too hard. Rose, the housemaid, had warned her it was tense today, and Miss Marple believed her. Tension, she knew, was where truths started to slip out. Rose opened the door, her freckled face pale and her hands fidgeting with her apron. "They're in the drawing-room, Miss Marple," she whispered, "but it's not a happy day. Arthur's been drinking again." Miss Marple gave her a kind nod. "Thank you, Rose. Don't fret, dear. I'll manage." The drawing-room was grand, with tall ceilings and a fireplace crackling softly. Heavy velvet curtains framed the windows, and a crystal chandelier caught the light. Colonel Langley sat in a high-backed armchair, his face grey, his hands gripping a cane. His eyes, once sharp from his army days, looked cloudy now, like a sky before rain. Beside him stood Eleanor, his young wife, her blonde hair pinned up, her smile bright but tight, like a mask that didn't quite fit. Arthur leaned against the window-sill, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his jaw set hard. Clara, his sister, sat on a sofa, a book open on her lap, but her fingers weren't turning the pages. "Miss Marple, how delightful!" Eleanor's voice was warm, like honey, but her green eyes flicked over Miss Marple, quick and sharp. "We're so grateful for those church flowers, aren't we, darling?" Colonel Langley grunted, shifting in his chair. Yes, good of you to come. Sit down, have some tea." Miss Marple settled into a cushioned chair, her knitting bag at her feet. Her needles clicked softly as she pulled out her yarn, her hands busy, but her eyes everywhere. Eleanor poured tea from a silver pot, her movements smooth but careful, like someone walking on thin ice. She handed Miss Marple a cup, her smile never fading. "Such a lovely home," Miss Marple said, her voice light as a breeze. "You must feel so lucky, Mrs. Langley, to live here." "Oh, I do," Eleanor said, sitting beside the Colonel. Her hand rested on his arm, gentle but firm. "It's a lot to manage, though. The Colonel's health keeps me busy." "Doesn't it, darling?" The Colonel coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Too much fussing," he muttered. "I'm fine, just tired." Arthur snorted, swirling his drink. "Fine? You look like death, Father. Maybe it's all those pills she's feeding you." "Arthur!" Clara's voice was sharp, her book snapping shut. "That's enough." Eleanor's smile stayed, but her fingers tightened on the Colonel's arm. "Arthur's just worried," she said, her tone smooth as glass. "We all are. The Colonel's heart isn't what it was." Miss Marple sipped her tea, watching over the rim of her cup. Eleanor's words were sweet, but her eyes were cold, darting to Arthur, then to the Colonel, like she was waiting for something to happen. On the sideboard, Miss Marple spotted a small brown bottle with a handwritten label. Medicine, no doubt. She also noticed Rose lingering in the doorway, her hands twisting her apron again, her eyes fixed on Eleanor. "Dr. Hargrove's been a blessing," Eleanor said, nodding toward a corner of the room. Miss Marple hadn't seen the doctor there, a thin man with grey hair and tired eyes, half hidden by a bookshelf. He checks on the Colonel every week. Don't you, Dr. Hargrove?" The doctor nodded, stepping forward. "Doing my best. The Colonel's a tough old soldier, but his heart needs care." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "Medicine can be tricky, though. I had a cousin once who mixed up her pills. Nearly the end of her." Eleanor laughed. Little too loud, like a bell rung too hard. "Oh, I'm very careful. I measure every dose myself. Don't I, darling?" The Colonel nodded, but his eyes were on his tea, not his wife. Miss Marple watched Eleanor closely. Why was she so keen to handle the medicine? Most wives left that to maids or nurses. And why was Rose so jumpy? The girl looked like she wanted to bolt. The talk turned to village matters, the spring fete, the church roof needing repairs, the new vicar's odd sermons. But Miss Marple's mind was on the room. Arthur's anger was loud, his face red from whisky and resentment. Clara's silence was louder, her eyes darting to her brother, then her father, then Eleanor. And Eleanor, she was playing a part, like a girl in a school play, all smiles and no heart. Miss Marple had seen that act before, years ago, in a woman who'd slipped something into her husband's tea for his money. The memory made her needles pause. "More tea, Miss Marple?" Eleanor asked, holding up the pot. "No, thank you," Miss Marple said, smiling. "It's lovely, though. You have a knack for it." Eleanor beamed, but her eyes didn't. Miss Marple glanced at the medicine bottle again. It was small, with a dropper, not the usual kind for heart pills. She thought of the village gossip. Eleanor buying pills at the chemist, the Colonel's sudden tiredness, and Rose's whisper about the letter in Arthur's coat. It was all connected, like stitches, in a scarf, but the pattern wasn't clear yet. Arthur slammed his glass down, making Clara jump. "This is nonsense," he said, his voice thick. "Sitting here, pretending everything's fine. You're not fooling anyone, Eleanor." "Arthur, please," Clara said, her voice low but sharp. "Not now." "Let him speak," the Colonel growled, his cane tapping the floor. "Boy's got no sense, but he's not wrong. Things aren't right." Eleanor's smile faltered just for a second, like a candle flickering in a draught. "Darling, you're tired," she said, patting his hand. "Maybe you should rest." "I'm not a child," the Colonel snapped, pulling his hand away. "Stop treating me like one." Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. The room was a pot ready to boil over. Arthur's anger, Clara's fear, Eleanor's control. It was a dance, and someone was leading. She thought of Rose's words about the letter. Why would Eleanor slip something into Arthur's coat? To trick him? To trap him? Miss Marple needed to see that letter, but not yet. She needed more threads to pull. The tea ended with polite goodbyes, but the air was heavy. Eleanor walked Miss Marple to the door, her smile back in place. "Do come, again," she said. "It's so nice to have friends in the village." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her own smile gentle, but her eyes sharp. "Take care of the Colonel, my dear. He's lucky to have you." Eleanor's laugh was bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. Rose followed Miss Marple to the gate, her steps quick and nervous. "Ma'am," she whispered, glancing back at the house. "I heard something else. Last night Mrs. Langley was in the study with a man, not the Colonel. I didn't see him, but they were whispering about money." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "Thank you, Rose. You're a good girl. Keep your ears open, but don't let them see." Rose nodded, her eyes wide, and scurried back inside. Miss Marple walked down the hill, the manor fading behind her. The evening air was cool, the village quiet except for the distant bark of a dog. Her mind was busy, sorting clues like cards. The medicine bottle, Arthur's anger, Clara's silence, the letter in the coat, and now a stranger in the study, talking money with Eleanor. It smelled of betrayal, the kind that ended in tears, or worse. She remembered a case in St. Mary Mead, years ago, when a young wife had played the same game. Smiles for the village, poison for her husband. That woman had a partner too, a man who slipped in at night. Miss Marple had caught them because of a dropped glove, a tiny thing no one else noticed. She didn't have a glove yet, but she had Rose, and Rose was watching. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and settled into her armchair. Her knitting lay untouched as she stared at the fire. Eleanor was the key, she was sure. The woman's charm was a curtain, hiding something dark. But who was the man in the study? A lover? A schemer? And what was the letter meant to do? Miss Marple didn't know yet, but she felt the shape of it, like a shadow moving closer. Betrayal was brewing in Langley Manor, and she'd seen it coming, from the moment she heard the gossip in the shop. Now, she just had to wait and watch for the next loose thread. Chapter 3. The Shadow of Motive. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a soft grey blanket. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, her tea steaming in a china cup, her knitting folded neatly beside her. The roses outside her cottage window looked damp and heavy, but her mind was sharp, slicing through the clues she'd gathered at Langley Manor. Eleanor's tight smiles, the medicine bottle, Rose's whisper about a man in the study. It all pointed to something dark, like a storm brewing behind a sunny day. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her blue eyes thoughtful. She'd seen betrayal before, in faces that smiled too much, or hands that shook just a little. Eleanor was hiding something, and the letter in Arthur's coat was a thread to pull. But who was the man Rose heard? A lover? A partner in some scheme? And why was Clara so quiet, her eyes always watching? Miss Marple knew families could turn on each other when money was involved, like dogs fighting over a bone. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Mrs. Price, the shopkeeper, her round face flushed from hurrying. "Miss Marple, you won't believe it," she said, stepping inside. "There was a row at Langley Manor last night, shouting loud enough to wake the dead." Miss Marple poured her a cup of tea. "Do sit down, Mrs. Price. What kind of row?" Mrs. Price plopped into a chair, her apron crinkling. "My nephew, Tom, delivers milk to the manor. He heard it all, from the kitchen door. Colonel Langley and Arthur going at it like cats and dogs. Arthur was yelling about the will, saying his father's lost his mind to cut him out. The colonel told him to leave and never come back." Miss Marple's needles clicked in her mind, though her hands stayed still. Was anyone else there? Mrs. Langley, perhaps? Mrs. Price nodded. Tom saw Eleanor in the hall, listening, and Clara too, standing by the stairs, looking scared. Tom said it gave him chills, the way Eleanor smiled, like she was pleased. Miss Marple's lips pressed thin. Eleanor's smile was a clue, like a dropped handkerchief at a crime scene. She thanked Mrs. Price, who bustled off to spread the news. Alone again, Miss Marple thought of Rose's story. The letter, the man in the study. Arthur's fight with his father fit too neatly, like a puzzle piece forced into place. Was Eleanor stirring trouble, setting Arthur up to look guilty? She decided to visit the manor again. Not to tea this time, but to talk to Rose. Servants saw things others missed, like dust in corners. She put on her coat and hat, grabbed her knitting bag, and walked up the hill. The mist was lifting, but the air felt heavy, as if the village itself was holding its breath. At Langley Manor, Rose answered the door, her eyes wide. "Miss Marple, I wasn't expecting you." "I was passing by," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. "I thought you might need a chat. You seemed worried yesterday." Rose glanced behind her, then stepped outside, closing the door softly. "I am worried, ma'am. Things are worse today. Arthur's gone to the pub, drinking again. Clara's shut herself in her room. And Mrs. Langley, she's been in the study all morning with that man again." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "The same man you heard last night?" Rose nodded, her freckles standing out against her pale skin. "I didn't see him clear, but he's tall, with dark hair. They were whispering about a plan, something about after it's done. I hid in the pantry, but I heard that much." Miss Marple patted her arm. "You're very brave, Rose. Did you see anything else? That letter, perhaps?" Rose shook her head. "I haven't had a chance to look. Arthur's coat is in the hall, but Mrs. Langley's always nearby. It's like she knows I'm watching." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Don't risk it yet, dear. Just keep your eyes open. Can you get me inside? I'd like to speak to Miss Clara, if she's up to it." Rose hesitated, then nodded. "I'll say you're here about the church fete. Follow me." The manor's hall was dim, with oak panels and a ticking grandfather clock. Rose led Miss Marple to the drawing-room, where Clara sat by a window, a book in her hands but her eyes on the garden. She looked up, startled, her face pale and her brown hair messy, like she hadn't slept. "Miss Marple!" Clara's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "What brings you here?" Miss Marple sat, her knitting bag at her feet. "I was passing, dear, and thought I'd check on you. I heard about last night's trouble." Clara's fingers tightened on her book. "It was awful. Arthur shouldn't have shouted, but Father's so stubborn. And Eleanor—" She stopped, biting her lip. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she pulled out her yarn. "Mrs. Langley seems very devoted," she said, her tone light. "Though I suppose it's hard, being so young in such a big house." Clara's eyes flashed. "Devoted? She's playing a part, always fussing over Father. But it's not love. It's something else." Miss Marple nodded, her face kind but her mind sharp. Clara's words were a crack in the wall, letting light in. "Families can be complicated," she said. "I had a nephew once who fought with his father over money. It ended badly, I'm afraid." Clara looked away, her hands trembling. "Arthur's angry, but he'd never hurt Father. He just wants what's fair. Eleanor's changed everything." Before Miss Marple could reply, the door swung open. Eleanor stood there, her blonde hair glowing in the light, her smile bright but cold. Miss Marple, what a surprise! Rose said you're here about the fete." Miss Marple smiled back, her eyes meeting Eleanor's. "Yes, dear. I thought Clara might help with the flower stall, but we got to chatting." Eleanor's smile didn't waver, but her hands smoothed her dress, a small, nervous move. "How kind of you. Clara's been so quiet lately. Haven't you, dear?" Clara stood, her book falling to the floor. "I'm fine," she said, her voice sharp. She left the room, her steps quick. Eleanor sighed, picking up the book. "She's upset about last night. Arthur and the Colonel had a dreadful fight. It's all so tiring." Miss Marple watched her closely. Eleanor's voice was smooth, but her eyes flicked to the door, like she was checking for listeners. "Families do argue," Miss Marple said, "though it's sad when money comes between them." Eleanor laughed, a brittle sound. "Oh, it's not just money. Arthur's always been difficult, but I keep things calm for the Colonel's sake." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. She noticed Rose in the hall, hovering near a coat rack. Arthur's coat hung there, a dark wool one with a torn pocket. She caught Rose's eye and gave a tiny nod. Rose slipped away, her face determined. As Eleanor poured more tea, Miss Marple kept the talk light. Village gossip, the weather, the vicar's new dog. But her mind was on that coat. If Rose could get the letter, it might show Eleanor's hand. And the man in the study, who was he? Miss Marple thought of a case years ago when a young wife had a secret partner, a man who came at night to plan a theft. That wife had smiled like Eleanor, all charm and no heart. The visit ended with polite goodbyes. Eleanor walked Miss Marple to the door, her smile as bright as ever. "Do come again," she said. "It's so nice to have friends." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her own smile gentle. "Take care of the Colonel, dear. He needs you." Eleanor's laugh was sharp, like glass breaking. Miss Marple walked down the hill, the manor's shadow long behind her. The mist was gone, but the air still felt heavy. She thought of Clara's anger, Eleanor's nervous hands, and Rose's bravery. The letter was key, she was sure. And the man in the study. He was the shadow behind Eleanor's smile. That evening, Rose slipped into Miss Marple's cottage. Her face flushed. "I got it, ma'am," she whispered, holding out a folded paper. "It was in Arthur's coat, just like I said." Miss Marple took the letter, her heart quickening. It was plain paper, with handwriting that looked like Arthur's but wasn't quite right. The loops too wide, the T's too sharp. It read, "I can't wait any longer. If Father doesn't change the will, I'll make sure he doesn't last." Missy Marple's eyes narrowed. A forged letter meant to make Arthur look guilty. She thought of Eleanor's quick glances, her insistence on the Colonel's medicine. The pieces were falling into place like stitches in a pattern. Eleanor was weaving a trap, and Arthur was the bait. "Thank you, Rose," she said, tucking the letter into her bag. "You've done well. Now be careful. Don't let Mrs. Langley see you're suspicious." Rose nodded, her eyes wide. "I won't, ma'am, but I'm scared. What if they hurt the Colonel?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "We won't let that happen, dear. Go home and rest." Alone, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the letter in her lap. The man in the study, the forged letter, the Colonel's weak heart. It all pointed to Eleanor, but she wasn't alone. Someone was helping her, someone who knew the manor's secrets. Miss Marple didn't have all the threads yet, but she felt the shape of the betrayal, cold and clear. She'd seen it coming, and now she was closer to stopping it. Chapter 4. An Unexpected Visitor. The sun dipped low over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in shades of orange and pink. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy cottage, her knitting needles quiet for once, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the letter Rose had brought. The forged note, written to look like Arthur's, was a cold piece of evidence, like a snake coiled in her lap. It accused Arthur of wanting his father dead, but Miss Marple knew better. The handwriting was too neat, too practised, like someone trying too hard to copy. Eleanor, she thought, was behind it, and the man in the study was part of her plan. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the fire crackling softly in her hearth. The village was quiet outside, but her mind buzzed with clues. Eleanor's tight smiles, the medicine bottle, Rose's story of whispers in the study, and now this letter. It was a puzzle, and every piece pointed to betrayal. But who was the man helping Eleanor? A lover, perhaps, or someone greedier? Miss Marple remembered a case in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a charming stranger had turned out to be a thief, working with a wife to rob her husband. History, she knew, had a way of repeating itself. A sharp knock at the door broke her thoughts. She opened it to find Mrs. Dane, the postmistress, her eyes wide with news. "Miss Marple, you'll never guess," she said, stepping inside. "There's a stranger at Langley Manor. Showed up this morning bold as brass. Says he's Eleanor's brother, but no one's seen him before." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. Her brother? How interesting. What's he like? Mrs. Dane plopped into a chair, fanning herself. Tall, dark hair, smooth talker. Calls himself Victor Crane. Says he's an artist, but he looks shifty to me. Tom, the milk boy, saw him carrying a suitcase, like he's staying a while. Miss Marple poured her a cup of tea, her mind racing. Victor Crane. The man in the study, no doubt. Rose had heard him whispering with Eleanor about a plan. An artist with a suitcase didn't sound like a casual visitor. "Did Tom hear anything else?" she asked, her voice gentle. Mrs. Dane leaned forward. "He said Victor and Eleanor were laughing in the garden, like they're up to something, and the Colonel wasn't happy. Told Victor to keep his distance." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers itching for her needles. A brother arriving just as the Colonel's health faltered, and Arthur fought over the will. It was too neat, like a stitch pulled tight. She thanked Mrs. Dane, who hurried off to share the gossip. Alone, Miss Marple thought of the letter. If Victor was Eleanor's partner, the forged note might be their way to frame Arthur, clearing the path for the inheritance. She decided to call on Sir Henry Clithering, her old friend from Scotland Yard, who was staying nearby. He knew people's pasts, the kind of secrets that didn't reach village ears. She wrote a quick note, asking about Victor Crane, and sent it with the postboy. Then she put on her hat and coat, grabbed her knitting bag, and headed to the village square. She needed to see Victor for herself, and the best place was the Red Lion pub, where strangers often stopped. The pub was warm and smoky, with low beams and the clink of glasses. Miss Marple sat in a corner, her knitting out, her eyes scanning the room. Arthur was there, slumped at the bar, his face red from drink. He was muttering to Mr. Tuttle, the baker, about his father's will. Miss Marple listened, her needles clicking softly. "He's cut me out," Arthur slurred. "All for that woman. She's got him fooled, but not me." Mr. Tuttle shook his head. "Careful, Arthur. Talk like that makes you look bad." Miss Marple's eyes moved to the door as a tall man walked in. He had dark hair, a sharp jaw, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His suit was neat but worn, like he'd tried to look rich but couldn't quite manage. He ordered a drink and glanced around, his gaze lingering on Arthur. Miss Marple knew at once. This was Victor Crane. She watched as Victor approached Arthur, his voice low and smooth. "You must be Arthur Langley," he said, offering a hand. "I'm Victor, Eleanor's brother. Just arrived to visit." Arthur glared, ignoring the hand. "What do you want? Another leech after my father's money?" Victor laughed, but it was thin, like a cracked bell. "Just here to see my sister. Family, you know." Miss Marple's needles paused. Victor's tone was too slick, like oil on water. She noticed his eyes flick to Arthur's coat, hanging on a chair. The same coat Rose had found the letter in. Was Victor checking if it was still there? She sipped her tea, pretending to focus on her knitting, but her ears caught every word. "You don't fool me," Arthur said, his voice loud. "You and Eleanor are up to something. I'll find out what." Victor's smile didn't waver. "You're upset, old man. Have another drink and calm down." Arthur shoved his glass away, standing unsteadily. "Stay away from my father," he said, and stumbled out, leaving his coat behind. Miss Marple watched Victor. He waited a moment, then picked up Arthur's coat as if to hang it properly. But his hand slipped into the pocket quick as a fox and came out empty. His face tightened just for a second before he smiled again and returned to his drink. Miss Marple's heart beat faster. Victor knew about the letter, or knew it was gone. She thought of Rose, brave little Rose, who'd taken it for her, Eleanor. And Victor were working together, she was sure, and the letter was their trap. But for what? To make Arthur look guilty of something worse than shouting? She left the pub, her steps slow, but her mind racing. Back home, she found a reply from Sir Henry waiting. His note was short but sharp. Victor Crane, known for petty fraud in London. Suspected in a poisoning case, never charged. Watch him closely. Miss Marple sat by her fire, the letter and Sir Henry's note side by side. Poisoning. The word sent a chill through her. She thought of the Colonel's grey face, the medicine bottle, Eleanor's insistence on measuring the doses. Victor's arrival wasn't a coincidence. It was part of the plan. She remembered a St. Mary Mead woman who'd poisoned her husband for his money, helped by a cousin who'd vanished before the trial. Victor was no cousin, but he was trouble. The next morning, she walked to the church where the Fate Committee was meeting. It was a chance to see Clara and maybe learn more about Victor. The church hall was busy, with tables of jam jars and bunting half-hung. Clara was there, arranging flowers, her hands shaking slightly. Miss Marple approached, her smile kind. "Good morning, Clara," she said, setting her knitting bag down. "Those roses are lovely. You have a gift." Clara blushed, her eyes tired. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I like flowers. They're simpler than people." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. "People can be complicated. Like your new visitor, Mr. Crane. He seems charming." Clara's hands froze. Victor! He's Eleanor's brother. I don't know him well. He showed up yesterday, out of nowhere." Miss Marple watched her closely. Clara's voice was steady, but her eyes darted away like she was hiding something. "Brothers can be a surprise," Miss Marple said. "I had a friend whose brother turned up after years, wanting money. It caused such a fuss." Clara's lips pressed thin. "Victor's not like that. He's just visiting. But Father doesn't like him. Says he's trouble." Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. Clara knew more than she was saying. Was she protecting Eleanor, or afraid of Victor? Before she could ask, Eleanor swept into the hall, her dress bright blue, her smile dazzling. Victor was with her, his dark hair slicked back, his eyes scanning the room. "Miss Marple!" Eleanor called, her voice like a bell. "Helping with the fete? How sweet!" "Just lending a hand," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "And I see you've brought your brother. How nice to have family." Victor bowed slightly, his smile sharp. "A pleasure, Miss Marple. St. Mary Mead's charming. I might stay a while." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her mind was on Sir Henry's note. Fraud. Poisoning. Victor's charm was a mask, like Eleanor's, and she felt the danger in it. She noticed Clara step back, her face pale, as if Victor's presence made her nervous. The meeting dragged on, with talk of stalls and raffles, but Miss Marple watched the trio. Eleanor's bright chatter, Victor's smooth replies, Clara's silence. When it ended, she walked home, her thoughts heavy. Victor was the man in the study, she was sure. He and Eleanor were planning something, and the letter was part of it. But what? Poison for the Colonel? A frame-up for Arthur? And where? Did Clara fit? That evening Rose slipped into the cottage, her face flushed. "Miss Marple, I heard them again," she whispered. "Eleanor and Victor in the study. They said something about the dose and not too fast. I think it's about the Colonel's medicine." Miss Marple's heart sank, but her voice stayed calm. "You're doing wonderfully, Rose. Did they say anything else?" Rose nodded. "Victor said, Arthur's the perfect scapegoat. I ran before they saw me." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind racing. The dose, the letter, Arthur as the scapegoat. It was clear now. Eleanor and Victor were plotting to harm the Colonel and pin it on Arthur. She thought of the medicine bottle, the Colonel's weak heart, Victor's past. The pattern was forming, like a scarf taking shape. "Thank you, Rose," she said. "Go home and be careful. We're close now." Alone, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the letter and Sir Henry's note in her lap. The betrayal was clear, but she needed proof, something solid, like the vial in that old case, when a wifey's poison was found in a garden shed. She didn't have it yet, but she felt the truth closing in, like a net tightening. Eleanor and Victor thought they were clever, but Miss Marple had seen their kind before, and she was ready to pull the final thread. Chapter 5. The Colonel's Collapse. The St. Mary Mead village fete buzzed with life, like a beehive under the summer sun. Stalls lined the green, selling jam, cakes, and knitted scarves. Children ran with sticky faces, laughing as they chased a stray dog. The air smelled of fresh grass and warm scones, but Miss Jane Marple's sharp blue eyes weren't on the fun. They were on Langley Manor's family, standing near the tea tent, their faces tight with secrets. Miss Marple sat on a bench, her knitting bag at her side, her needles clicking softly. Her hat shaded her face, but nothing hid her gaze. She'd come to watch, not to enjoy. The forged letter, Victor's shady past, Rose's whisper about the dose. It all pointed to a betrayal brewing, and today felt like the day it might spill over. Eleanor and Victor were plotting, she was sure, and Arthur was their scapegoat. But the Colonel was the target, and his weak heart made him easy prey. The tea tent was busy, with Mrs. Price pouring cups and chatting loudly. Colonel Langley stood nearby, leaning on his cane, his face greyer than ever. Eleanor was at his side, her blonde hair shining, her smile bright but sharp, like a knife hidden in a bouquet. Arthur slouched by a table, his eyes red from last night's drinking. Clara stood apart, twisting a handkerchief, her face pale. Victor, the new arrival, hovered near Eleanor, his dark hair slicked back, his smile too smooth. Miss Marple watched Eleanor hand the Colonel a cup of tea, her hand steady but her eyes flicking to Victor. The Colonel took it, grumbling, and sipped slowly. Miss Marple's needles paused. Eleanor had insisted on pouring the tea herself, just like she measured the Colonel's medicine. Rose had said they'd talked about the dose. Was this cup the next step in their plan? The fete carried on, with music from a fiddler and cheers from a sack race. Miss Marple kept her eyes on the family. Arthur argued with a stall vendor, his voice loud, drawing stares. Clara moved closer to her father, her eyes on his cup like she was scared of it. Victor whispered something to Eleanor, and her laugh rang out, sharp and false. Miss Marple felt a chill despite the warm day. She remembered a St. Mary Mead fete years ago, when a woman slipped something into her rival's lemonade. That woman had smiled just like Eleanor. Suddenly, the Colonel swayed, his cane clattering to the ground. His cup fell, spilling tea on the grass. He clutched his chest, his face twisting in pain, and collapsed with a groan. The crowd gasped, and Eleanor screamed, "Help! Someone help him!" Dr. Hargrove, who'd been judging the cake contest, rushed over, his thin face grim. He knelt beside the Colonel, loosening his collar. "Breathe, old man," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "Someone fetch my bag." Miss Marple stood, her knitting forgotten, her heart racing but her face calm. She moved closer, watching Eleanor's tears and Victor's quick glance at the spilled cup. Clara was frozen, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Arthur pushed through the crowd, his face pale. "What's happened, father?" Dr. Hargrove checked the Colonel's pulse, then looked up. "He's alive, but it's his heart. We need to get him to the manor." Volunteers carried the Colonel to a cart, and Dr. Hargrove followed, barking orders. Eleanor clung to Victor's arm, sobbing, but Miss Marple noticed her eyes were dry. Victor's face was blank, like he was waiting for a signal. The crowd buzzed with worry, and Mrs. Dane whispered to Mrs. Price, "It's that wife of his, mark my words." Miss Marple slipped away, her mind sharp as a needle. She found Rose near the tea tent, her freckled face white with fear. "Rose, dear," Miss Marple said softly, "did you see who poured the Colonel's tea?" Rose nodded, her voice a whisper. "It was Mrs. Langley. She used a special pot, not the one Mrs. Price was serving from. I saw her bring it from the manor." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "A special pot, like the special bottle of medicine." She patted Rose's hand. "Good girl. Did you notice anything else?" Rose hesitated. When the cup fell, Victor picked it up quick, like he didn't want anyone to see it. He put it in his pocket. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Victor hiding the cup was a clue, like a dropped glove in a theft case she'd solved years ago. "Thank you, Rose. Stay with the fate, and don't let them see you're worried." She walked to the manor, her steps slow, but her mind racing. The Colonel's collapse wasn't chance, it was planned. The forged letter, Victor's past, the talk of the dose, it all pointed to poison. Eleanor and Victor wanted the Colonel gone, and they wanted Arthur to take the blame. But Clara's fear and silence puzzled her. Was she part of it, or just caught in the web? At the manor, the hall was quiet, the grandfather clock ticking loudly. Rose let her in, whispering, "They're in the drawing-room. Dr. Hargrove's, with the Colonel." Miss Marple nodded and entered the drawing-room. The Colonel lay on a sofa, his breathing shallow but steady. Dr. Hargrove was checking his pulse, his bag open with bottles and tools. Eleanor stood by the window, her face pale but composed. Victor was near the fire, his hands in his pockets, the cup nowhere in sight. Clara sat in a corner, her eyes red from crying. "Miss Marple," Dr. Hargrove said, looking up. "Good of you to come. He's stable now, but it was close. His heart's weaker than I thought." Miss Marple's voice was gentle. "How dreadful! Was it his heart alone, or something else?" Dr. Hargrove frowned. "I'm not sure. It came on fast, like a shock to his system. I've sent for tests on his blood." Eleanor turned, her voice soft but sharp. "It's his heart, surely. He's been so tired lately. I've done everything to keep him well." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes on Eleanor's hands, which twitched slightly. "Of course, dear, you're so devoted, though tea can be tricky, at a fete. So many hands about." Victor's head snapped up, but he said nothing. Miss Marple noticed his pocket bulging slightly, as if the cup was still there. She thought of Rose's words and the special pot. Poison, she was sure, but she needed proof. Inspector Craddock arrived, his face stern. He'd been at the fete, judging the vegetable contest, and had heard the news. "Miss Marple," he said, nodding. "What's this about the Colonel?" She pulled him aside, her voice low. "Inspector, I think you should look at the tea he drank. Mrs. Langley poured it from a special pot, and her brother Victor took the cup. There's a letter, too, in my cottage, forged to look like Arthur's, threatening his father." Craddock's eyes widened. "Poison? That's a big leap, Miss Marple." "Not so big," she said, her tone mild. "I've seen it before, in a village not unlike this one. A wife, a brother, a plan. Check the cup, Inspector, and the pot." Craddock nodded, his jaw tight. He approached Victor, who was now by Eleanor's side. "Mr. Crane, I hear you picked up the Colonel's cup. Mind if I see it?" Victor's smile was smooth, but his eyes flicked to Eleanor. "Cup? I don't have it. Must have dropped it in the grass. Miss Marple's needles would have clicked if she'd been holding them. A lie, bold and clear." She caught Clara's eye, and the girl looked away, her hands trembling. Clara knew something, but fear kept her quiet. The inspector searched Victor's pockets, finding nothing. Miss Marple wasn't surprised. Victor was clever enough to hide the cup somewhere. But the pot was still at the fete, and she whispered to Craddock to secure it. He sent a constable to fetch it, then turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Langley, you poured the tea. Where's the pot now?" Eleanor's face paled, but her voice stayed steady. "It's just a teapot, Inspector. I brought it to keep the Colonel's tea warm. He's so particular." Miss Marple watched her closely. Eleanor's calm was cracking like thin ice underfoot. She thought of the medicine bottle, the forged letter, Victor's fraud record. The pieces were falling into place, but she needed more, something solid, like the vial in that old poisoning case. Dr. Hargrove spoke up. "I've given him something to stabilize his heart, but I'll need those test results. If there's poison, we'll know soon." Miss Marple nodded, her mind on the cup. Victor had hidden it, but where? She remembered Rose saying he'd picked it up quickly, like he didn't want it seen. The manor's grounds were large, gardens, sheds, a greenhouse, a good place to hide something small. She excused herself, saying she needed air, and slipped outside. The garden was quiet, the roses heavy with evening dew. She walked toward the greenhouse, her eyes scanning the ground. Near a yew bush, she spotted a glint of china, the Colonel's cup, half buried in the dirt. She didn't touch it, knowing the inspector would want it clean. But she saw a faint stain inside, not tea, but something darker, like residue. Miss Marple's heart sank. Poison, just as she'd feared. She thought of the yew bush. Yew was toxic, used in old poison recipes. She'd seen a case like this before, when a gardener's wife used yew extract to settle a score. Eleanor and Victor were clever, but not clever enough. She returned to the manor where Craddock was questioning Eleanor. Miss Marple whispered to him about the cup, and his eyes lit up. "Good work, Miss Marple. We'll get it tested with the pot." As the inspector left to retrieve the cup, Miss Marple sat by Clara, who was still trembling. "Dear," she said, softly, "you know something, don't you? It's hard to carry secrets alone." Clara's eyes filled with tears. I can't say. They'll hurt me." Miss Marple patted her hand. "No one will hurt you, Clara. Tell the truth, and we'll keep you safe." Clara shook her head, her voice a whisper. "It's Eleanor and Victor. They're planning something. I heard them, but I'm scared." Miss Marple's heart ached, but her resolve hardened. Clara was a loose thread, and Eleanor and Victor were the knot. She'd unravel it soon before the Colonel's outer. Chapter 6. Clues in the Garden. The morning sun broke through the clouds over St. Mary Mead, casting a soft glow on the village. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her tea cooling in its cup, her knitting needles quiet. Her sharp blue eyes were far away, piecing together the puzzle of Langley Manor. The Colonel's collapse at the fete, the stained cup hidden by the yew bush, Clara's whispered fear. It all pointed to a dark plan. Eleanor and Victor were behind it, Miss Marple was sure, and the forged letter made Arthur their scapegoat. But the truth was close now, like a shadow taking shape. She sipped her tea, her mind on the cup she'd found last night. The dark residue inside wasn't tea. It was poison, she felt certain, maybe from the yew bush nearby. She'd told Inspector Craddock where to find it, and he'd promised to test it with the special teapot Eleanor had used. But Miss Marple needed more. Clara's tears and half-spoken words hinted at a deeper role, and the garden held secrets, like the vial she'd once found in a St. Mary Mead shed that cracked a case wide open. A knock at the door startled her. It was Rose, the Langleys' housemaid, her freckled face pale, and her apron twisted in her hands. "Miss Marple, ma'am," she whispered, stepping inside. "I couldn't wait. I saw something in the garden this morning, near the greenhouse. It's scary." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice stayed calm. "Sit down, Rose. Tell me everything." Rose perched on a chair, her eyes wide. "I was fetching herbs for cook, and I saw a glass bottle under the yew bushes, half buried. It had a funny smell, like medicine gone bad. I didn't touch it, but it's near where you found that cup." Miss Marple's fingers itched for her needles. "A bottle by the yew bushes. Another clue, like a dropped stitch." "You did well, Rose," she said. "Did anyone see you?" Rose shook her head. "No, ma'am, but Mrs. Langley and Mr. Victor were in the greenhouse earlier, talking low. I hid behind the roses." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "You're a brave girl. What did they say?" Rose blushed. "Something about keeping Clara quiet and finishing it soon. I ran before they came out." Miss Marple's heart sank, but her face stayed kind. Keeping Clara quiet. Finishing it soon. The words were cold, like frost on a window. She thought of the Colonel's grey face, the forged letter, Victor's fraud record. Eleanor and Victor were closing their trap, and Clara was tangled in it, maybe against her will. "Thank you, Rose. Go back to the manor, but be careful. Don't let them suspect you." Rose nodded and slipped out, her steps quick. Miss Marple put on her coat and hat, grabbed her knitting bag, and headed to Langley Manor. She needed to see that bottle herself and talk to Clara before Eleanor and Victor silenced her. The village was quiet, with only a few children playing by the pond. The manor loomed on the hill, its windows dark, like eyes hiding secrets. At the gate, Miss Marple paused, her gaze on the garden. The yew bushes stood tall, their leaves glossy but deadly. She knew yew could be ground into poison. She walked toward the greenhouse, her steps slow, her eyes scanning the ground. Near the bushes she spotted it, a small glass bottle, half covered, in dirt, its cork loose. A faint bitter smell hung around it, like spoiled herbs. She didn't touch it, knowing Craddock would want it for tests, but she marked the spot with a pebble. The bottle was proof, she was sure, like the vial in that old case when a wife poisoned her husband's wine. Miss Marple thought of Rose's words, Eleanor and Victor in the greenhouse, talking about Clara. The garden was their hiding place, careless but clever. She straightened, her mind sharp, and headed to the manor's door. Rose let her in, her face nervous. "They're in the drawing-room, ma'am," she whispered. "The Colonel's upstairs, resting. Miss Clara's in the library." Miss Marple nodded and walked to the library, a dim room with tall shelves and a musty smell. Clara sat by a window, a book open but unread, her hands twisting a scarf. Her face was pale, her eyes red, like she'd been crying again. "Clara, dear," Miss Marple said, sitting beside her, her knitting bag at her feet. "You look troubled. Can I help?" Clara's eyes darted to the door, then back to Miss Marple. I don't know. It's all so awful. Father's sick, Arthur's angry, and Eleanor." Her voice broke. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she pulled out her yarn. "Eleanor seems so devoted," she said, her tone light. "But families can hide things. I had a friend once, caught in a plan she didn't want. She was scared, like you." Clara's hands froze. "Scared? I'm not—" She stopped, her lips trembling. "I heard them, Miss Marple. Eleanor and Victor. They're doing something to Father. I didn't know at first, but now I'm sure." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "What did you hear, dear?" Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "They talked about his medicine, putting something in it. Victor said it's slow, so no one suspects. I wanted to tell Father, but Eleanor said if I talk, they'll hurt me, or Arthur." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind racing. Clara's confession was a crack in the wall, letting light in. "You're very brave, Clara. Do you know what they're using? A bottle, perhaps?" Clara's eyes widened. "I saw Victor with a bottle once in the greenhouse. He hid it when he saw me. I thought it was paint. He says he's an artist. But it smelled strange." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking faster. The bottle in the garden, the yew bushes, the smell, it all fit. She thought of the cup's residue, the special teapot. Eleanor and Victor were poisoning the Colonel slowly, framing Arthur with the letter. But Clara was their weak link, and they knew it. Before she could say more, the door opened. Eleanor stood there, her blonde hair neat, her smile bright but cold. "Miss Marple, checking on Clara? How kind!" Clara flinched, her scarf falling to the floor. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes meeting Eleanor's. "Just a chat, dear. Clara's been so helpful with the fete." Eleanor's smile didn't waver, but her hands smoothed her dress, a nervous tick. "She's been quiet lately. All this fuss, with the Colonel's health. Haven't you, Clara?" Clara nodded, her eyes on the floor. Miss Marple noticed Victor in the hall, his dark eyes watching. She felt the air tighten, like a storm brewing. "I should go," she said, standing. "The Colonel needs rest, I'm sure." Eleanor walked her to the door, her voice sweet. "Do come again. It's so nice to have friends." Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was on the bottle. "Take care of the Colonel, dear. He's lucky to have you." Eleanor's laugh was sharp, like a snapped twig. Miss Marple walked down the hill, the manor's shadow long behind her. She stopped by the vicarage to find Inspector Craddock, who was meeting with the vicar about the fete. She pulled him aside, her voice low. "Inspector, there's a bottle in the manor's garden near the yew bushes by the greenhouse," she said. "It smells bitter, like poison. Test it with the cup and teapot. And talk to Clara. She knows more than she's said." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Another clue? You're sharp, Miss Marple. I'll get the bottle and have a word with Clara. But we need those test results to move." Miss Marple nodded, her face calm, but her mind racing. The bottle was the proof she needed, like the vial in that old case. She thought of Clara's fear, Victor's smooth lies, Eleanor's control. The betrayal was clear, but it wasn't over. Eleanor and Victor were desperate now, and desperate people made mistakes. Back home, she sat by her fire, the forged letter on her table. She thought of Rose's bravery, Clara's confession, the yew bushes. The pattern was forming, like a scarf nearly done, but she needed one more thread, something to tie Eleanor and Victor to the poison directly. She remembered a St. Mary Mead gardener who'd used yew extract to kill pests, not people, but the idea was the same. Eleanor was clever, but not clever enough to hide forever. That evening, Dr. Hargrove stopped by, his face tired. "Miss Marple, the Colonel's stable, but the tests came back. There's a toxin in his blood slow-acting, like digitalis or worse. We're checking the cup and pot now." Miss Marple's heart sank, but her voice stayed steady. "Thank you, Doctor. Check the bottle in the garden, too. It's near the yew bushes." Dr. Hargrove nodded, his eyes grim. "If it's yew, we'll know. It's a nasty poison, hard to trace." After he left, Miss Marple sat alone, her tea cold. Yew poison. The bottle. The cup. Clara's words. It was all coming together. But Eleanor and Victor were still free, and Clara was in danger. She thought of the forged letter, meant to damn Arthur. They'd planned it well, but they hadn't planned on her. She picked up her knitting, her needles, clicking like a clock. The betrayal was unravelling thread by thread. She'd seen it coming from the village gossip, and now she was close to stopping it. But she needed to act fast before Eleanor and Victor tied off their plan and left the Colonel dead. Chapter 7. The Letter Revealed. The evening light faded over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across Miss Jane Marple's cottage garden. She sat by her fire, her tea untouched, her knitting needles still. Her sharp blue eyes were on the forged letter Rose had brought days ago, its words cold and accusing. "I can't wait any longer. If Father doesn't change the will, I'll make sure he doesn't last." The handwriting mimicked Arthur's, but the loops were too wide, the T's too sharp. Miss Marple knew it was a fake, and Eleanor was behind it, with Victor as her shadow. The bottle by the yew bushes, the stained cup, Clara's whispered fears, all pointed to poison and a plan to frame Arthur. But the letter was the key, and tonight Miss Marple would tie it to Eleanor. She thought of the Colonel's collapse at the fete, the bitter smell of the bottle, and Dr. Hargrove's report of a toxin in his blood. Yew poison, slow and deadly, was Eleanor and Victor's weapon, she was sure. Clara's confession had cracked the case open, but fear kept her quiet. Miss Marple needed proof, something solid to show Inspector Craddock before Eleanor and Victor struck again. The letter was her start, but she needed more, like the handwriting match she'd once found in a St. Mary Mead case, when a forged note led to a thief's arrest. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Mrs. Price, the shopkeeper, her face flushed with news. "Miss Marple, there's trouble at the manor," she said, stepping inside. "Tom, my nephew, heard shouting again. Arthur and Victor this time, in the yard. Nearly came to blows." Miss Marple poured her a cup of tea, her mind sharp. What were they fighting about, Mrs. Price? Mrs. Price sat, her apron crinkling. "Tom said Arthur accused Victor of sneaking around, plotting with Eleanor. Victor laughed it off, but Tom saw him clench his fists. Clara was there too, begging them to stop. The Colonel's upstairs, still weak from the fete. Miss Marple's needles would have clicked if she'd been holding them. Arthur's anger was dangerous, making him an easy target for Eleanor's trap. Victor's presence was stirring the pot, and Clara's fear was a loose thread. "Thank you, Mrs. Price," she said. "I'll look into it." Mrs. Price left, eager to spread the gossip. Miss Marple opened her desk drawer where she kept the forged letter. She needed to compare it to Eleanor's writing, and she remembered the thank-you note Eleanor had sent for the church flowers. It was in her knitting bag, tucked among her yarn. She pulled it out, her hands steady, but her heart quickening. The note was short. Dear Miss Marple, thank you for the lovely flowers. Yours, Eleanor Langley. The handwriting was neat, with wide loops and sharp T's, almost identical to the forged letter. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The match was clear, like a pattern in a scarf. Eleanor had written the letter to frame Arthur, hoping to pin the Colonel's death on him, but she'd been careless, using her own style. Miss Marple thought of a case years ago, when a wife's forged will was caught because of her fancy cursive. Eleanor's mistake was smaller, but it was enough. She decided to visit the manor, to see Clara and check on the Colonel. But first, she needed to talk to Rose, who'd been watching Eleanor and Victor. She put on her coat and hat, tucked the letter and note into her bag, and walked up the hill. The manor's stone walls loomed in the dusk, its windows glowing like wary eyes. The air felt heavy, like the village knew trouble was coming. Rose opened the door, her freckled face pale. Miss Marple, thank goodness, she whispered. It's bad today. Arthur's in the drawing room shouting at Clara. Mrs. Langley and Victor are upstairs with the Colonel. Miss Marple patted her arm. You're doing wonderfully, Rose. Can you get me to the library? I need to speak to Clara quietly. Rose nodded and led her through the dim hall, the grandfather clock ticking loudly. The library was quiet, with shelves of dusty books and a single lamp. Clara sat by a table, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Arthur stood by the window, his voice low but angry. You know they're up to something, Clara, he said. Why won't you speak? Father's dying and you're just sitting there. Clara looked up, her eyes red. Stop it, Arthur. You're making it worse. Miss Marple cleared her throat, and both turned, startled. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, her voice gentle. I was passing and heard the Colonel still unwell. Clara, may I have a word? Arthur glared but stomped out, muttering, about the pub. Clara wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. Miss Marple sat beside her, her knitting bag at her feet. Dear, you're carrying a heavy load, she said. I know about Eleanor and Victor. You don't have to protect them. Clara's breath hitched. I'm not protecting them. I'm scared, Miss Marple. They said if I talk, they'll make it look like I helped. Victor's dangerous. Miss Marple's heart ached, but her mind was sharp. What do they want? Clara, the truth will keep you safe. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. It's Father's money. Eleanor wants it all, and Victor's helping her. They're putting something in his medicine. You, I think. I saw Victor grinding leaves in the greenhouse. I didn't know what it was at first, but now. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly as she pulled out her yarn. You're very brave, dear. I found a bottle in the garden, near the yew bushes. The inspector's testing it. And this. She pulled out the forged letter, keeping the thank-you note hidden. Do you recognize it? Clara's eyes widened. That's Arthur's writing. Or it looks like it. Where did you get it? From his coat, Miss Marple said, watching her closely. But it's not his, is it? Clara shook her head. No, Eleanor writes like that. I've seen her notes. She's trying to make Arthur look guilty. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Clara's words matched the handwriting, tying Eleanor to the letter. She thought of the poison, the cup, the bottle. The pattern was clear now, like a scarf nearly, finished. "Thank you, Clara. Stay strong, and don't let them see you're talking." Clara nodded, her eyes still scared but firmer. Miss Marple stood, her bag heavier with the letter's weight. She needed to get it to Craddock, along with the thank-you note, to prove Eleanor's hand in the forgery. But as she reached the hall, she heard voices, Eleanor and Victor, coming downstairs, their tones low and sharp. "She's asking too. Many questions," Victor said. "That old woman's trouble." "Keep your voice down," Eleanor hissed. "We're close. One more dose, and it's done." Miss Marple slipped behind a curtain, her breath steady but her heart racing. One more dose. The Colonel was in danger, and time was short. She waited until their footsteps faded, then hurried to the door. Rose was there, her face pale. "They're in the study now," Rose whispered. "I heard them lock the door." Miss Marple nodded. "Good girl. I need you to fetch Inspector Craddock. Tell him to come quickly with the test results if he has them." Rose ran off, her apron flapping. Miss Marple walked down the hill, the manor's shadow cold behind her. She thought of the letter, the bottle, Clara's confession. Eleanor and Victor were desperate now, and desperate people were dangerous. She remembered a St. Mary Mead case, when a cornered wife tried to burn evidence and nearly burned the house down. Eleanor wasn't there yet, but she was close. At home, she found Craddock waiting, his face grim. "Miss Marple, the tests are back," he said. "The cup and teapot had extract, same as the Colonel's blood. That bottle you found, it's a match. We're building a case, but we need more to arrest them." Miss Marple pulled out the forged letter and the thank-you note. "Compare these, Inspector. The handwriting's the same. Eleanor wrote this to frame Arthur. Clara can confirm it." Craddock's eyes lit up as he took the papers. "This is solid. If Clara talks, we've got her. But Victor's slippery. His record shows he's dodged charges before." Miss Marple nodded, her face calm, but her mind racing. "They're planning another dose, Inspector. I heard them. You need to act fast." Craddock stood, his jaw tight. "I'll get a warrant and bring Clara in for a statement. Stay clear of the manor, Miss Marple. It's getting dangerous." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "I'm just an old lady knitting, Inspector, but I'll keep my eyes open." Alone, she sat by her fire, the papers gone, but their weight still in her mind. The letter was the proof she'd needed, and Clara's words were the knot. Eleanor and Victor thought they were clever, but they'd underestimated St. Mary Mead. And her. She thought of the poison, the forged letter, the Colonel's weak heart. The betrayal was unravelling, and she was one step from stopping it. But one more dose meant one more chance for them to slip away. She picked up her knitting, her needles, clicking like a countdown. The truth was close, and she wouldn't let it escape. Chapter 8. A Trap. Set in motion. The morning mist curled around St. Mary Mead, softening the village's edges, but not Miss Jane Marple's sharp mind. She sat in her cottage, her tea steaming, her knitting needles quiet. Her blue eyes were bright, piecing together the puzzle of Langley Manor. The forged letter, the poison in the Colonel's cup, Clara's whispered confession. It all pointed to Eleanor and Victor's deadly plan. They wanted the Colonel's money, with Arthur as their scapegoat, but Miss Marple was closing in. The handwriting match between Eleanor's note and the letter was proof, and Inspector Craddock was ready to act. But one more dose she'd overheard could end it all. Today she'd set a trap to catch them before they struck. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind on Clara's fear and Arthur's anger. Clara knew too much, and Victor's threat to silence her was real. Arthur's fights with his father made him the perfect target for Eleanor's forged letter, but his hot head could be useful. If he accused Eleanor openly, it might push her and Victor to slip up. Miss Marple remembered a St. Mary Mead case, when a thief panicked during a staged fight and dropped stolen jewels. She needed a similar mistake now, a confession, or evidence left in the open. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Inspector Craddock, his face stern, but his eyes keen. "Miss Marple, the warrant's ready," he said, stepping inside. "The handwriting's a match, and the bottle had you extract, same as the cup and teapot. Clara's statement seals it, but we need to catch them in the act to make it stick." Miss Marple nodded, her hands folding neatly. "They're planning another dose, Inspector. I heard them yesterday. We can't wait for them to try again." Craddock's jaw tightened. "What's your plan? You always have one." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Use Arthur, Inspector. He's angry and loud. Let him accuse Eleanor in front of everyone. Say he's found proof she's poisoning the Colonel. She'll panic, and Victor will react. Watch them closely, and have men ready to search the study. That's where they plan." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "Risky, but it could work. Arthur's already on edge. I'll talk to him. Keep it quiet. What about Clara?" "Protect her," Miss Marple said. "She's scared, but she'll talk. If she feels safe, ask her to watch Victor's moves during the confrontation. She knows his habits." Craddock nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "I'll set it up for tonight at the Manor. Dr. Hargrove's checking the Colonel now. He's stable but weak. We'll keep him safe." Miss Marple smiled, her voice gentle. "Good, Inspector. And check the greenhouse again. They might hide more poison there." Craddock left, his steps quick. Miss Marple put on her hat and coat, grabbed her knitting bag, and walked to the village shop. She needed to see Rose, who'd been her eyes at the Manor. The shop was busy, with Mrs. Price chatting loudly about the Colonel's collapse. Miss Marple bought a tin of biscuits, her ears open. "Rose was here earlier," Mrs. Price said, handing her change. "Poor girl looked scared. Said Victor's been in the greenhouse all morning, fiddling with plants." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "Thank you, Mrs. Price. I'll have a word with her." She found Rose by the church, arranging flowers for the altar. The girl's freckled face lit up, then fell. "Miss Marple, I'm so glad you're here," she whispered. "I saw Victor again in the greenhouse. He had another bottle like the one I found. He hid it under a pot." Miss Marple patted her arm. "You're a treasure, Rose. Tell Inspector Craddock exactly where it is. And watch Clara tonight. She'll need a friend." Rose nodded, her eyes wide. Miss Marple walked back to her cottage, her mind racing. Another bottle in the greenhouse meant Eleanor and Victor were ready for their final dose. The trap had to work, or the Colonel wouldn't survive. She thought of Arthur's anger, Clara's fear, Eleanor's smooth lies. It was a dance, and she was leading now. That evening, The manor was lit up, its windows glowing in the dusk. Miss Marple arrived with Craddock, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, her face calm, but her eyes sharp. The drawing-room was tense, with the Colonel propped on a sofa, his face grey but his eyes alert. Dr. Hargrove stood nearby, his bag ready. Eleanor sat beside the Colonel, her blonde hair neat, her smile tight. Victor leaned by the fireplace, his dark eyes watchful. Arthur paced, his hands clenched, and Clara sat in a corner, her scarf twisted in her lap. Craddock cleared his throat. "We're here to clear up some matters," he said, his voice firm. "Arthur, you've got something to say." Arthur stopped pacing, his face red. "I do," he growled, pointing at Eleanor. "You're poisoning my father, you and that brother of yours. I found proof, your notes, your plans. You won't get away with it." Eleanor's smile froze, her hands gripping her dress. "Arthur, that's nonsense. I love your father. How dare you?" Victor stepped forward, his voice smooth but sharp. "Easy, old man. You're drunk again, making things up." Miss Marple watched closely, her needles clicking softly in her bag. Eleanor's eyes flicked to Victor, a quick signal. Victor's hand moved toward his pocket, then stopped. Craddock's men, hidden in the hall, were ready, and Miss Marple caught Clara's glance. She was watching Victor, just as asked. "I'm not drunk," Arthur shouted. "I saw you, Eleanor, with that teapot at the fete. And Victor, sneaking, around the greenhouse. You're killing him for his money." The Colonel stirred, his voice weak but angry. "What's this? Eleanor, what's he talking about?" Eleanor's laugh was brittle, like glass cracking. "Darling, he's upset about the will. He's making it all up." Miss Marple spoke, her voice gentle but clear. "Not quite, dear. There's a letter, written to look like Arthur's, threatening the Colonel. But the handwriting matches yours, Mrs. Langley. And a bottle in the garden, with you poison, like the cup at the fete." Eleanor's face paled, her smile gone. Victor's eyes narrowed, his hand twitching. "You're meddling, old lady," he said, his voice low. "No proof. Just talk." Craddock stepped forward, holding the forged letter and Eleanor's thank-you note. "We've got proof. The handwriting's a match, and Clara's told us about the U in the greenhouse." Clara gasped, her scarf falling. I had to," she whispered. "They threatened me." Eleanor stood, her voice sharp. "Clara, be quiet. You don't know what you're saying." Victor moved toward Clara, but Craddock's men burst in, blocking him. "Stay where you are, Crane," Craddock said. "We're searching the study and greenhouse. Rose told us about another bottle." Victor's face twisted, and he lunged for the door, but a constable grabbed him. Eleanor screamed, "You can't do this! We've done nothing!" Miss Marple watched, her face calm, but her heart racing. The trap had worked. Arthur's accusations, Clara's words, the evidence. She thought of Rose's bravery. Finding the second bottle, Craddock's men led Victor to the study, where Rose said they'd locked themselves before. Eleanor followed, her face white, her hands shaking. In the study, Craddock found a locked drawer. "Open it, Mrs. Langley," he said. Eleanor hesitated, then pulled a key from her pocket, her hands trembling. Inside was a notebook, its pages filled with Eleanor's handwriting, notes on U poison, doses, and a plan to frame Arthur. Craddock's eyes lit up. "This is it," he said, bagging the notebook. Miss Marple glanced at Clara, who was crying softly. "You did the right thing, dear," she said. "Your father's safe now." The Colonel, helped by Dr. Hargrove, stood shakily. "Eleanor, is this true?" he asked, his voice breaking. Eleanor's mask cracked, her eyes wild. "You don't understand. I did it for us, for a better life," Victor snarled, struggling against the constable. "Shut up, Eleanor. They've got nothing." Craddock shook his head. "We've got enough. You're both under arrest for attempted murder." As they were led away, Miss Marple sat by Clara, her needles clicking again. The room was quiet now, the tension gone like a storm passing. She thought of the letter, the bottle, the notebook, all threads in a pattern she'd seen. From the start, Eleanor and Victor had been clever, but not clever enough for St. Mary Mead. Dr. Hargrove checked the Colonel, his face grim but relieved. "He'll recover, with rest. No more of that poison." Arthur, sober now, knelt by his father. "I'm sorry, Father. I didn't know." The Colonel patted his hand, his eyes wet. "We'll fix this, son. No more fighting." Miss Marple smiled, her work nearly done. She'd set the trap, and Eleanor and Victor had walked into it. But Clara's role still nagged her. She'd known too much, stayed quiet too long. Miss Marple would talk to her later, gently, to ease her guilt. She thought of a St. Mary Mead girl, years ago, who'd been coerced into a theft, but found peace after confessing. Clara could too. As she left the manor, the stars were bright above, the village calm. Craddock walked beside her, his notebook full. "You did it again, Miss Marple," he said. "How do you see these things?" She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "I just watch, Inspector. People are like knitting. Pull the right thread and it all comes clear." At home, she sat by, her fire, her knitting in her lap. The betrayal was exposed, the Colonel safe, but one more step remained. Justice and healing for Clara. She'd seen it coming from the village gossip, and now the trap was sprung. Her needles clicked softly, like a promise that St. Mary Mead would sleep soundly tonight. Chapter 9. The Night of Reckoning. The evening air in St. Mary Mead was cool, wrapping the village in a quiet hush. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her tea growing cold, her knitting needles still. Her sharp blue eyes were bright, piecing together the final threads of the Langley Manor mystery. The forged letter, the yew poison in the Colonel's cup, the bottle in the garden, Clara's fearful confession, it all pointed to Eleanor and Victor's deadly scheme. They'd planned to kill the Colonel for his money, framing Arthur with the letter. But Miss Marple's trap had caught them. The notebook found in the study, filled with Eleanor's notes on poison, was proof, and Inspector Craddock had them in custody. But Miss Marple wanted a confession, clear and final, to seal the case and free Clara from her guilt. Tonight she'd make it happen. She sipped her tea, her mind on the confrontation at the manor last night. Arthur's accusations had rattled Eleanor, and Victor's lunge for the door showed their panic. Clara's words, admitting she'd known about the poison but was threatened, had cracked the case open. Yet Miss Marple felt one more push was needed. Eleanor and Victor were slippery, like eels in a stream, and a public confession would tie up every loose end. She remembered a St. Mary Mead case when a staged argument forced a thief to confess in front of witnesses. A similar plan would work now, with the whole family watching. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Rose, the manor's housemaid, her freckled face pale, but her eyes bright with news. "Miss Marple, ma'am," she whispered, stepping inside. "The inspector's at the manor questioning Mrs. Langley and Mr. Victor. They're denying everything, but Clara's shaking like a leaf." Miss Marple poured her a cup of tea, her voice gentle. "Sit, dear. What's Clara doing?" Rose clutched the cup, her hands trembling. "She's in the library crying. She told me she heard Victor threaten her again before the inspector came. Said if she talks more, she'll regret it." Miss Marple's heart sank, but her face stayed calm. Victor's threats were desperate, a sign they were cornered. "You're a brave girl, Rose. Did you hear anything else?" Rose nodded. "Mrs. Langley was whispering to Victor in the hall, saying they should blame Clara, say she helped with the poison. I hid behind the stairs and heard it all." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Blaming Clara was a cruel twist, but it fit Eleanor's cunning. She thought of the notebook, the letter, the U-bottle. Proof enough, but a confession would make it ironclad. "Thank you, Rose. Go back and stay near Clara. She needs you now." Rose scurried off, her apron flapping. Miss Marple put on her hat and coat, grabbed her knitting bag, and called Inspector Craddock. Her plan was simple. Gather the family, let Arthur accuse Eleanor again, and push Victor to crack. Clara's presence would force the truth out, especially if she felt safe. Craddock agreed, his voice grim but eager. "We'll do it tonight, Miss Marple. I'll have men ready, and Dr. Hargrove to watch the Colonel." The manor loomed dark against the evening sky, its windows glowing like wary eyes. Miss Marple arrived, with Craddock, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, her face calm, but her heart racing. The drawing-room was heavy with tension, the fire crackling low. Colonel Langley sat on a sofa, propped up with pillows, his face grey but his eyes sharp. Dr. Hargrove stood nearby, checking his pulse. Arthur paced by the window, his fists clenched. Clara sat in a corner, her scarf twisted tight in her hands. Eleanor and Victor stood by the fireplace, their faces pale but defiant, handcuffs glinting on their wrists. Craddock cleared his throat, his voice firm. "We're here to settle this," he said. "Arthur, you've got more to say. Go on." Arthur turned, his face red with anger. "You poisoned my father!" he shouted, pointing at Eleanor. "You and Victor, with that U stuff in his tea and medicine. I know about the letter too. You're fake, trying to pin it on me." Eleanor's eyes widened, her smile gone. "That's a lie," she said, her voice sharp. "Arthur's mad because of the will. He's making it up." Victor stepped forward, his dark eyes cold. "No proof, just a drunk's ravings." Miss Marple spoke softly, her voice cutting through the room. "There's proof, Mr. Crane. The letter in Arthur's coat, written in Mrs. Langley's hand. The U poison in the cup, the teapot, the bottle in the garden, and a notebook detailing your plan." Eleanor's face went white, her hands shaking. "A notebook? That's nonsense." Victor laughed, a harsh sound. "You've got nothing, old lady. Just papers and guesses." Miss Marple pulled the forged letter and Eleanor's thank-you note from her bag, holding them up. The handwriting matches, Inspector Craddock confirmed it. and Clara saw you in the greenhouse, Victor, grinding yew leaves." Clara gasped, her scarf falling to the floor. I told the truth," she whispered. "They made me keep quiet. They said they'd hurt me." The Colonel's voice rasped, weak but furious. "Clara, is this true? You knew?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I was scared, Father. They threatened to blame me too. I didn't know about the poison at first, I swear." Eleanor's voice turned shrill. "She's lying. She helped us. She wanted the money too." Victor hissed at her. "Shut up, Eleanor." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her face stayed calm. "Clara's no liar, Mrs. Langley. She was coerced, frightened. But you wrote the letter to frame Arthur, and you and Victor poisoned the Colonel's tea." The room went silent. The fires crackled loud in the stillness. Colonel Langley stared at Eleanor, his face crumpling. "Why, Eleanor?" "I loved you." Eleanor's mask broke, her voice a sob. "You don't understand. You were old, sick. I wanted a life, a real life. Victor promised we'd share it all." Victor lunged forward, his handcuffs clanking. "You fool! You've ruined us!" Craddock's men grabbed him, pulling him back. Eleanor collapsed into a chair, crying. "It was Victor's idea," she gasped. "He knew about you, how to make. It's slow. He said Arthur would take the blame, and we'd be free." Victor's face twisted with rage. "You're lying. You begged me to help. You wanted the old man dead." The Colonel's cane hit the floor with a thud. "Enough!" he roared, his voice stronger than before. "You betrayed me, both of you. Get them out of my house." Craddock nodded, his face grim. "Eleanor Langley, Victor Crane, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy." As the constables led them away, Eleanor's sobs echoed in the hall. Victor was silent, his eyes burning with hate. Miss Marple sat by Clara, her needles clicking softly. "You're safe now, dear," she said. "You did the right thing." Clara clung to her hand, tears streaming. "I should have told sooner. I was so scared." Arthur knelt by his father, his voice thick. "Father, I'm sorry. I was angry, but I'd never hurt you." The Colonel gripped his son's shoulder, his eyes wet. "I know, boy. We'll mend this." Dr. Hargrove checked the Colonel's pulse, his face relieved. "He's strong enough to pull through with care. No more poison." Miss Marple smiled, her heart light. The trap had worked. Arthur's anger, Clara's truth, the notebook, the letter. Eleanor and Victor had confessed, their plan unravelling, like a dropped stitch. She thought of Rose, brave and watchful, and Clara, trapped by fear but free now. The manor was quiet, the betrayal exposed. Craddock walked Miss Marple to the door, his notebook full. "You've done it again," he said. "How do you spot these things?" She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "People are like knitting, Inspector. Pull the right thread and the truth comes loose." As she walked down the hill, the village was dark, the stars bright above. The manor's lights faded behind her, but the weight of the night stayed. Clara's guilt, Arthur's shame, the Colonel's heartbreak, they'd heal, but it would take time. Miss Marple had seen the betrayal coming, from the gossip in the shop to the poison in the cup. Now it was over, and St. Mary Mead could rest. At home she sat by her fire, her knitting in her lap. The letter and notebook were with Craddock, the bottle and cup in evidence. The pattern was complete, but one thread lingered: Clara's healing. Miss Marple would visit her tomorrow, with tea and kind words, like she'd done for a frightened girl in a St. Mary Mead case long ago. Jiaouf, needles clicked softly, a rhythm of peace. The night of reckoning was done, and justice was coming. Chapter 10. Justice in St. Mary Mead. The morning sun poured through the windows of Miss Marple's cottage, painting the room in soft gold. She sat in her favourite armchair, her knitting needles clicking steadily, a ball of pale blue wool unravelling in her lap. The fire crackled low, and a pot of tea steamed on the table, filling the air with a comforting smell. Outside, St. Mary Mead hummed with its usual rhythm, children laughing, a dog barking, the postman's bicycle bell jingling down the lane. But the village was buzzing with more than its daily chatter. The news from Langley Manor had spread like wildfire, and Miss Marple knew the shop would be full of whispers today. She sipped her tea, her blue eyes thoughtful. Last night's reckoning at the manor had been sharp, like a storm breaking after days of heavy clouds. Eleanor and Victor were gone, taken by Inspector Craddock to face justice. Clara's tears had dried, and Arthur's anger had softened. Colonel Langley was safe, his heart still beating, his family bruised but whole. Miss Marple smiled to herself. She'd seen the betrayal coming, just as the title of her story promised, but tying up the loose threads always felt good. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Rose, the housemaid from the manor, stood there, her freckled face flushed from the walk. Her apron was neat, but her hands twisted nervously, like she wasn't sure she should be here. "Come in, dear," Miss Marple said, her voice warm as the tea. "Sit down. You look like you need a cup." Rose perched on the edge of a chair, her eyes wide. "Oh, Miss Marple, the village is talking. They say Mrs. Langley and her brother tried to poison the colonel. Is it true?" Miss Marple poured tea, her movement slow and steady. "It's true, Rose," she said, handing her the cup. "But don't let the gossip run wild. Let me tell you what happened, so you can set things straight." Rose nodded, clutching the cup like it was an anchor. Miss Marple leaned back, her needles clicking again, her voice soft but clear, like a story told by a fire. "It started with greed," she said. "Eleanor married the colonel for his money. She was young, charming, and clever. Too clever, I thought when I met her at the church bazaar. Her smiles were too perfect, like a picture in a magazine. I've seen that kind before, in St. Mary Mead. There was a woman once, years ago, who smiled the same way while she sold her husband's secrets." Rose's eyes widened. "But how did you know she'd hurt the colonel?" "I didn't, at first," Miss Marple said, her needles pausing. "But I heard whispers in the shop about the colonel's new will, leaving most of his money to Eleanor. Arthur and Clara were angry, and the village noticed. Then, at tea in the manor, I saw how Eleanor watched the colonel, like a cat watching a bird. She poured his tea, measured his medicine, always hovering. It wasn't love, it was control." Rose shivered, sipping her tea. "And the medicine, was it poison?" Miss Marple nodded. "You poison, slow and sneaky. Dr. Hargrove found traces in the colonel's tea after he collapsed at the fete. I found a bottle in the garden, hidden near the yew bushes. Eleanor and her brother Victor planned it carefully. They wanted the Colonel gone before he could change his will again. "Victor," Rose gasped. "I knew he wasn't right. Sneaking around, pretending to paint. What about the letter in Arthur's coat?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "That was their trick. Eleanor wrote a letter, making it look like Arthur's handwriting, saying he'd kill his father. They wanted him blamed, locked away, so Eleanor would get everything. But the handwriting wasn't perfect. I noticed the loops on the G's. Eleanor's were sharper, like her thank-you notes. A small thing, but small things catch big lies." Rose leaned forward, her tea forgotten. "And Clara? She was so quiet, but I heard her whispering with Victor." "Poor Clara," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "She was scared, caught in their web. Victor threatened her, said he'd hurt Arthur if she didn't help. She thought they were only scaring the Colonel to change his will back. She didn't know about the poison until it was too late. That's why she broke last." Knighton told the truth. Rose shook her head, her eyes wide. "You saw it all coming, didn't you?" "Like magic," Miss Marple chuckled, her needles clicking again. "No magic, dear. Just people. They're the same everywhere, in St. Mary Mead or London. Greed makes them sloppy. Eleanor and Victor thought they were clever, but they left trails. The bottle, the letter, their whispers. All I did was follow them." A second knock came, louder this time. Inspector Craddock stood at the door, his hat in hand, his face tired but pleased. "Miss Marple," he said, stepping inside, "I thought you'd want to know. Eleanor and Victor are locked up, and they've confessed everything. They'll face trial for attempted murder." Miss Marple nodded, setting her knitting down. "Good work, Inspector. And the Colonel?" Craddock smiled. "He's recovering. Dr. Hargrove says the poison's out of his system. He's rewriting his will again. This time, most of it goes to a veterans' charity. Arthur and Clara get enough to live on, but he wants to do some good with his money." "That's like him," Miss Marple said, her eyes warm. "He's a soldier at heart. And the family?" "They're talking," Craddock said, sitting down. "Arthur's sworn off drinking, and Clara's staying close to her father. They'll mend, thanks to you." Miss Marple waved a hand, her smile gentle. "I only helped them see the truth, Inspector. Families are like gardens. Pull out the weeds, and they can grow again." Rose stood, her face brighter. "I'd better get back to the manor," she said. "The Colonel needs his tea, and I'll make sure it's safe this time." Miss Marple laughed softly. "You're a good girl, Rose. Tell the Colonel I'll visit soon." Rose hurried out, her steps lighter. Craddock leaned back, sipping the tea Miss Marple offered. "You're a wonder, Miss Marple," he said. "How do you spot these things? The letter, the poison, Clara's fear. It's like you see through people." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled like stars in a clear sky. "I watch, Inspector. People show who they are in little ways. A smile that's too bright, a hand that shakes, a word out of place. I've lived long enough to know the patterns. St. Mary Mead teaches you that." Craddock nodded, standing. "Well, the village owes you. The manor's safe, and the talk will die down soon. Until the next trouble, anyway." "There's always a next trouble," Miss Marple said, her voice light but her eyes sharp. "But I'll be here, knitting by the fire." Craddock tipped his hat and left, his boots crunching on the path. Miss Marple sat back, her needles moving again, the blue wool forming neat rows. The village was quiet now, the manor at peace, but she knew St. Mary Mead never stayed still for long. Gossip would swirl, new secrets would grow, and she'd be ready, watching from her cottage, her mind as sharp as her needles. That afternoon she walked to the shop, her basket over her arm. The bell jingled as she stepped inside, and Mrs. Price, the shopkeeper, looked up, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Miss Marple," she said, leaning over the counter, "is it true? Mrs. Langley and that Victor tried to kill the Colonel." Miss Marple smiled, picking up a tin of biscuits. "It's true, Mrs. Price, but they're caught now, and the Colonel's safe. Let's talk about the spring fete instead. I hear the vicar's planning a new stall." Mrs. Price laughed, but her eyes begged for more. Miss Marple paid for her biscuits and stepped outside, the sun warm on her face. The village was alive, children playing, Mrs. Bantry weeding her garden, the postman waving as he passed. Langley Manor stood on the hill, its windows catching the light, no longer heavy with secrets. Miss Marple walked home, her steps slow but steady. She thought of Eleanor's cold smile, Victor's wild eyes, Clara's tears. Greed had torn the manor apart, but truth had stitched it back together. She remembered a girl in St. Mary Mead, years ago, who tried to cheat her aunt for a few pounds. The signs were the same. Too many smiles, too many lies. People never changed, but neither did justice. In her cottage, she lit the lamp. The glow soft and warm. Her knitting waited, the blue scarf nearly done. She sat down, her needles clicking, her mind already wandering to the next whisper, the next shadow. St. Mary Mead was her home, her puzzle, her story, and Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet ways, would always be ready to solve it.